This just in, news from around the world, people from all tribes, all tongues, every nation, proclaiming Christ is King. Ladies and gentlemen, what should come as no surprise that this statement is divisive, nay, inflammatory. We're here to talk about it.
Say Christ is Lord. Say it. You say Christ is Lord.
Okay, so something very important I think that we need to point out here is, if you guys remember, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about Bitcoin. And what happened a few days later? It shot up to 20,000. It went to the moon, right? And we took credit for it, rightfully so. In this sense, when we're talking about Christ is King, if you have been a loyal follower and one of our 52 subscribers, and you know 55. That we have an episode, 55 subscribers, even better, we know that we have an episode that was called Christ is King. So I think it's only appropriate that we take credit for it again, gentlemen, that we started this controversy, and we're going to go ahead and end it right here.
No. We didn't start the controversy. We reestablished, this notion of just, pride in our faith and these types of things, which was clearly co-opted.
We are such a powerful social force that, I wouldn't be surprised if Media Matters has us just on a loop, looking for ways to...
That's a good question. It's a good question.
So if you see this video in your Twitter feed as a response to all of those people using the Lord's name in vain, no, it's us that started it. We're not going to give you credit, okay? Because Christ is truly King, and He's King of Kings and Lord of Lords. I think there might be a little bit of different opinions on this panel alone about how hard and soft we should be going on this, but let's get into it. First of all, want to say Happy Easter. Hope you guys all had a wonderful Easter this Sunday. I know that I've been looking forward to it. My family's been looking forward to it, so hopefully you have.
What do you guys eat for Easter?
Ahead,
what is your? What do you guys eat for Easter? Like, what's your Easter feaster? Nothing.
What do I eat for Easter?
It's like a
change.
It's
all frustration with the number of people that are at church that were not here last Sunday. That's what I eat.
So you just go in and scowl. Like, I know why you're here.
Yeah. I know who you are. Glad you're here. Wish we were here yesterday or last week. Any other time.
They should come up with a particular dish to eat on Easter so that you only eat that dish once a year.
Just who does that?
Reflects
There's
with
a group of
everybody's church
people
attendance.
that I know of that are big on dietary things during certain times of year. I don't know. It'll come to me. Anyway, Christ
is King. All right, so let's get into it. On Palm Sunday, there was Christ is King was trending. And now the history of this kind of goes a lot farther back as to why this is controversial, but let me just kind of break it down for you. So on Palm Sunday, you had a particular influencer on Twitter, and now he wasn't the start of it. Maybe he was just coming up on saying it during, and he's a Muslim convert, right? He's popular. He's got a lot of followers. He's got 3.2 million views. So basically said Christ is King. So it's a Muslim, right?
But you said Muslim. Why?
Muslim.
No, I've never heard it said that way before.
Hagadarian, the children of Hagar. I don't know. Well, anyway, Muslim.
It's pronounced heretic. Sorry. Anyway, and we're walking.
So then Top G goes and comments, and now you can also probably understand Andrew Tate. He converted to Islam. His reasonings were that Islam is a masculine, powerful religion that doesn't take crap from anyone, and he thinks that Christianity is weak, and so it kind of reflected in his comments here the resurgence of Christian declarations of Christ is King. He's a Muslim, right? And he got a little bit of pushback from the Muslim community.
Yeah, but he's like a Muslim, like Kanye is a Christian,
Right?
Like he's in the second
example.
act. He's in the second act, all right? He's just
exactly
stuck. That's all.
Well, and I would argue that maybe SNEAKO is as well, right? So not I think the real devout Muslims were like, "What are you saying, brother? Delete this tweet. This is not, this is not haram. like
Habibi.
This is not kosher, right?
This
exactly.
is not.
So interesting. There wasn't a whole lot of pushback from Muslims saying this. So. You had Laura Chen, who's a conservative commentator, really pointed this out. It's interesting that I have yet to see a Muslim person take offense to this whole Christ is King controversy, and you wonder why. what is behind the whole Christ is King, that Muslims and atheists are saying this. You have a lot of people that are not Christians saying this. And really what it comes down to is there is the belief that saying Christ is King is used as a anti-Semitic term to really say, well, Christ is King, Jew, you filthy Jew. Like that's what they're saying. Oh, you're a filthy Jew.
The
Christ
first person
is King,
to
right?
use it that way was the Romans, right? What did they hang above Jesus' head?
Or the King of the Jew, right?
Harsh but fair.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's what's been going on. And so there's a whole lot more background that we can get into, but at this point, like, what do you guys think? Where do you guys stand on it?
I mean, I'll go first because it was funny when we were preparing. I was like, I have no idea what you guys are talking about. And so I had to, educate myself a bit. And I'm a fairly, read person of what's going on culturally. So if you're listening and you haven't heard either, I got to look into it a little bit. And I do think it is coincidental that Muslims are posting that. And there is no Muslim backlash. And also, geopolitically right now, Israel is at war invading Gaza. There is protests on the street in downtown Lynchburg at the market. There were Palestinian protesters just Saturday.
Wow.
And
Seriously?
I'm not even
Well, there's
kidding.
actually there's a pretty big Palestinian population in Lynchburg, actually.
Yeah.
In the surrounding area.
So yeah,
it's
I
a
mean,
small
I
town.
think at this point, just from the little bit I've looked at it, it's gotten swept away. Like the whoever the guy was, the Andrew Tate, like when he said it, like if you read the entire post, there was nothing in there to my impression where he's insinuating that. So I think people are like switching back and forth on it. Like some people mean it as let me hit you below the belt. I think some people are like, oh, it's Easter. Yeah, Christ is King. And they're just like, and so I think that's like created this like perfect storm of like, oh, people are saying Christ is King because he is. Let me just go ahead and post it. And now it's trending and now someone's mad and now Candice Owens is fired and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so, the world we live in is a mess. I was pleased that I didn't know about any of this when I heard about it.
Well, I mean, isn't that the whole like narrative of like how you respond to the proclamation that Christ is King kind of says a lot about where you're at.
Right.
I think what's fascinating, though, a lot of people forget the Islam thing is interesting, and I'm going to speak about this based on what you guys have said. I have not seen these posts, but based on what you're telling me, Josh, if that's the case, that like we have a large Muslim population or several. I'm assuming it should
and
be in the
atheists
thousands
or
for us to
non-Christians.
be. Yeah, but I specifically on the Islam thing because I think this is relevant, is because I think that's the one that's like triggering to a lot of people and like, oh, that's fascinating. Why would they be doing that? We have this concept in Islam. It's like me against my brother and I against my cousin, my brother, my cousin, and I against the infidel. And so, the notion here is that like, they would say that if it meant that they could destabilize, in these parts of the world. I'm not saying this of all Muslims. I'm saying that in fundamentalist Islamic jihadist sects, and in many instances, people who get caught up in social justice trends that aren't fully aware of the full history or implications of that. So I'm being generous, but I just want to say that to kind of cover that base. But yeah, so I think that that's where that's coming from. And I think what's also kind of nefarious about this is that I think that's what certain people who are viewing this whole situation in Israel as negative, or who want to distance, America's support of Israel, have found a way to it's like a catch-22 wedge. It's like, oh, you're mad? I just said Christ is King. Like, you're not mad about that, right? Because it's like a certain section of the population that supports Israel, also a certain section of the population that doesn't support Israel.
Yeah.
And both of those populations are pretty on board with the statement, Christ is King. So it is,
and if you are pro-Israel in the foreign policy sense, and you know that a lot of your popular support comes from the people who would agree with the literal sense of Christ as King, you probably don't want to be promoting that as a contentious top line issue.
And to those people who would use that, and here's what I would say to Christians. So this is where I put the pastor hat on, and I look at you, dear brother or sister in Christ, and I kindly remind you that Jesus does not take lightly to people using him for their own gains and their own ends. So whatever you think you understand, yes,
Amen.
Whatever you think you understand, or whatever you think you know, but be very, 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 very careful about what you do in that regard.
Did you just do a
As
Joe
I
Biden
admonish
whisper?
you, hey, it's
Let me tell you something. Sorry, go. I didn't mean to derail that. Go ahead, finish your
beep,
point.
cut, and moving on.
You're doing great. You're doing great.
You had me,
Got
brother.
knocked
Good,
out
man.
from
Got
under
me.
you.
So, all right, Tim.
Anyway,
With the gloves that you have on or off, let me know what you feel on this.
The gloves. There are no gloves. There are never any gloves.
just these hands.
Telling God about this podcast. It's all bare knuckle boxing.
There
I
you
guess-
go.
Tiny axes.
Right.
Sorry.
It's so great.
Anyway,
the thing, I guess the way I view it is that obviously we have a culture that's really hostile to Christianity in the first place. And I think that I see the playbook being applied here as broadly being not anti-Jew, right? But actually being anti-Christian, right? Because the goal is to bully Christians out of proclaiming a baseline literal theological truth that's absolutely uncontroversial within the boundaries of Christianity, because it might be, offensive to someone, right? If you can be bullied on Easter out of avoiding saying, "Oh, Christ is King," right?
Yeah.
Then really, it's because it's not like, "Oh, I'm just shouting it at a random Jew that I see on the street." Like, to Josh's point, like, be careful.
Yeah, brace
But
for shock.
This is the day, like, this is the week where we acknowledge
Of all weeks.
particularly the kingship imagery of Christ. Like, there are a lot of images and frames that the Bible puts around Jesus Christ in terms of his role, lamb, lion, king, all of these things. But just on Palm Sunday in particular, you have the triumphal entry, and of course anyway. But the device that I see, what?
no, go.
Oh yeah, the device that I see being used
Very
here
exciting.
is the sort of the playbook of semantic overload, which you see being used a lot. And I'll give you a relatively neutral example from like 2021, when the vaccines were out, right, and there was a pretty broad social contention about how people were going to take or not take those, right? There was the sort of a very broad definition of anti-vaxxer that was trotted out, right? To say, well, you're an anti-vaxxer if you oppose mandates, right? And to be fair, that definition did exist before 2021, but if you thought of an anti-vaxxer, you were thinking of suburban white women in San Francisco who didn't vaccinate their kids, right? It was a very specific thing.
Yep.
And then we weren't talking about new cutting edge vaccines. We were talking about MMR and whatever else. And so the goal there was very specifically to bully people who were in that neutral position of, oh, well, I'm going to get it for myself, but I'm not necessarily interested in compelling other people to do it. Like, oh, well, you don't want to be an anti-vaxxer, do you? Right? And so they've added this extra layer of meaning onto something in order to scare people off of it. And of course, here you have a little bit more nefarious or pernicious way of doing that, because now it's to genuinely draw a line between two groups of people. Like, so the semantic overload is not something that they actually want to endorse. The semantic overload is a poison pill, right? To make people ashamed to embrace that. Say, oh, well,
even say that.
Well, when Nick Fuentes says Christ is King, he's really being anti-Semitic. It's like, well, probably, right?
Yeah.
And he's going to answer for that on his own.
I'm not him. Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Right.
So it's funny. Oh, go
Yeah.
ahead, Tim. Yeah.
No, by all means, that was pretty much wrapped up.
So it's interesting because, that they did this on Palm Sunday of all times, because this is textbook. So
And Easter.
I'm
likely.
excited. I get to preach my part of my Palm Sunday sermon on this. So, all right. So check this out. So
Open up your Bibles.
the big catch in Palm Sunday, and if you read in Scripture during that in that passage, you'll see this. He's raised Lazarus from the dead. He's coming. Like, word has literally made it from Bethany up where he's at, down the mountains to Jerusalem, that Jesus raised someone from the dead. Now, up until this point, there were naysayers, there were people who were doing one thing or the other, but like Jesus goes and does the thing that nobody else has done up to this point, which is bring somebody who is like dead back to life. So now it's like, it's settled. They're like, he did what? And everybody knows, on like the day before Passover. And meanwhile, so here's Jesus coming down from the mountain, and this is when they get the donkey, and people are coming out, and they got the palm branches, and what are they singing? Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest. Hey, Christ is King. Like, I mean, for all intents and purposes, not exactly parallel, but it's pretty close. And here's up in the north, you've got Pontius Pilate coming up from Caesarea Philippi with the Roman garrison. And so what everybody thinks is going to happen is Christ is King. Jesus is coming. He's going to take out the Romans.
Yeah.
And so that's what everyone expects. Everyone's like, he's the Messiah. He raised somebody from dead. We're all about it. In other words, he's demonstrated sufficient power that we feel brave standing up to the Romans. So everyone gets real rowdy and celebratory. Where does Jesus go when he shows up in Jerusalem? Does anybody know? Where does he go? Where's the first place he goes in Jerusalem?
Does he go to the temple?
The temple.
He goes to the temple. That's right. He goes to the temple. And what does he do when he walks into the temple? Sits in the back. He sits in the back, just takes it in, starts braiding a whip, and then he starts flipping tables and all this stuff. And it's at that point that those people realize, oh, he's not here to challenge Rome. He's here to challenge us. Right?
Boom.
And
right.
so how
the king is home.
If that is the truth, Tim, if it is true that I don't know why this is doing this. If it is true that is what's happening, and somebody is nefariously attempting to use semantic overload, or whether it is true that they're using it as a dog whistle, like, that's the ironic thing, is that it's the people who are Christians, or people who fall victim to that, or where that's their mentality. Because I believe there were people out there who did believe that Christ was King. And guess what? Those people were still there a couple days later, carrying his body, donating their tombs, carrying and preparing his body, right? Mm-hmm. And those people, like, that's what's ironic. What the enemy intends for evil, God intends for good. So I look at that and I'm like, well, this is just right in line. Like, this is how I would expect to celebrate Palm Sunday, with a bunch of people who think they know Jesus, trying to use him for their means. And they're going to find out, just like they did 2,000 years ago, it's not going to go well.
But as a true, sincere Christian, you cannot let yourself be bullied away from those things. Yeah. Because there's a very natural theological tension between Christians and Jews. I mean, it's almost like we have a bunch of epistles that are written specifically on some of those things. Because obviously saying something that is foundational to the Christian faith, like Christ is King, is blasphemy to a Jew. That's true. And vice versa. Their rejection of Christ, right, is blasphemy to us. And because that blasphemy is based on actually something of a shared scriptural foundation in the sense of the Old Testament, it probably evokes a somewhat more visceral reaction. Like when you hear Ben Shapiro go on Rogan and say, well, Jesus was just trying to rebel against the Romans and got killed for his trouble. It's like, but again, it's a
Bet
theological
you won't say that to his face.
Not like a, right?
What's interesting, I think that it reminds me of a sermon I saw, or a clip I saw of Paul Washer, which he said something along the lines of, like, it was a youth camp, and he was like, I don't care for him, but I think what he said was good. He said something like, living in sin and thinking that you're going to be a Christian, is a terrible thing, and everybody's clapping, and he's like, I don't know why you're clapping. I'm talking about you, right? And it's almost like in the same sense, right? Yes. People are ushering in Christ is King, right. Christ is King, using the Lord's name in vain, and he goes to the temple and he's like, I don't know why you're celebrating. I'm talking about you.
I came here for you guys.
Right? I came here for you guys, right? Which is interesting. Jesus takes the gloves off all throughout his ministry. He's saying, don't tell anybody that I'm the Messiah. Don't tell anybody what you saw. Or the Pharisees go and try to grab him and he gets away, right? He's like ducking. He's talking in parables, right? And then all of a sudden he comes in.
I need to see the John Woo version of Jesus evading the Pharisees.
Be careful. Someone will try to make it. We don't want that. Angel
right?
Studios will be on that in a second.
Good Lord.
Anyway.
So then, he goes into Jerusalem. The gloves are off. There is no more. The time has come, right? It's like, this is Jesus uncensored. And he goes straight for the temple, flips over, and then proclaims himself to be God in front of the Jewish council.
Do you know, Josh, do you know what's crazy is the crux of this is? Do you know what Jesus says to himself, what he thinks when he's coming down the mountain on the donkey? He looks out and the people are cheering and everyone's like, hey, you need to calm down. And he's like, look, if they didn't do it, the rocks would cry out, right?
Yeah.
But then he says in the prayer, he says, if you, even you, knew right now what would bring you peace, but now it's held from you. Because why? Because Jesus, even up to that point, Jerusalem could have been saved the judgment that would come just a few years later when Jerusalem would be sacked and burned. It was because they did not see him for what he was, for who he was, that they would suffer. And man, that's what's so frustrating, I think, sometimes about being an American in a quote unquote Christian culture that's not a Christian nation, is that I'm just like so frustrated because the only thing that's going to bring these people, our country, to any semblance of understanding is unfortunately people are going to have to experience judgment. Though, in other words, not even like that in I don't mean that even in an apocalyptic way. I simply just mean like reaping the fruit of what they've planted.
Yeah, it doesn't require extra divine stuff. It's like he made the rules of the universe.
Right.
And
People get the governments they deserve.
You will reap.
Right, you reap what you sow.
Yeah.
And that's what breaks my heart is, and that's what breaks my heart looking, I watch the news, I see all this stuff and I'm like, they like, and then you understand like Jesus on the cross, and the thing that goes through his head is like, Lord, forgive them, God, they don't know what they do, because he knows the wrath that they're storing up for themselves. He knows, and it's gutting.
Yeah,
and I tell you, man, it's rough. It's frustrating.
Well, like Josh was saying before the show, how they're gonna steal Christ as King from us, and then just like we lost the rainbow. It's like, well, we didn't lose the rainbow. They're using it appropriately. They are thumbing their nose at God and saying, ha ha ha, you said you wouldn't destroy us again. And,
right.
It's like, well, with a flood specifically.
But in some way they have, culture has hijacked it, right? Like a perfect example would be, a personal example would be when we were burying our daughter, there was a rainbow over the gravesite. And, for us, it's special, but like if all of a sudden I were to post some picture, or not that I'm going to go buy a rainbow flag, nor do I want to, but if you that end, I'd be curious if I wanted to, and I would say that's what pisses me off the most. So I have a unique posture in all of this, and I think it started, not to be controversial here, but it started with Black Lives Matter. So Black Lives Matter, the anti-vax narrative, the rainbow narrative is also excellent. And now we're on to Christ as King. And whenever this stuff pops off in culture, personally, I've talked with a lot of guys about this. I've really enjoyed this posture. Quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry. I turn on my inner spy that I wanted to be, that I never got to be. And I just slowly observe the world around me. I observe a pastor and his social media post, and oh look, he got bandwagoned right along, or whatever. And so I don't know about you guys, but for me, I kind of use it as a litmus test to help me read those around me. So an example, because we haven't brought this up yet, Candice Owens was getting in a spat on Twitter with Ben Shapiro, and she uses the term for the only obvious reason and rationale that she could have and would have used the term while she's in a spat. And I'm like, I'm done with you, Candice. I don't actually care anymore. Yeah. And I use it that way. And then, I don't know. So with the Black Lives Matter, they do absolutely matter. With the anti-vaccine narrative, you know, with like, hey, it is okay to not want some experimental vaccine, but still be into modern medical science and et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know about you guys, but just my simple posture of after not having heard about this at all and then hearing about it, I'm like, all right, I don't care about you anymore. All right, I don't care about you anymore. All right, I don't care about you anymore. Cleans up my feed, so I'm excited about it.
Well, let's unpack that. I think you made a good point with the whole Black Lives Matter thing, because I think that that's exactly how they're repurposing Christ is King. If you look at the history of Black Lives Matter, the people that formed that were communists or Marxists, and the whole design of it was to bring division and hostilities, right? So no one can
Josh,
say
it was to. I don't want to be too inflammatory with that. What it was intended to do, and this is a good thing because I think this is important, is galvanize people on a specific line that is hard to argue with, and that's why like slogans are very different. Yeah, I know that, but I just want to say like the people who identify it. Correct. What I'm saying is that I think that there are people, and there might even be people who listen to this who agree with what we're saying, but who when they even think about their own response to that, and I'm saying this is just being conscious of the fact that we are four white dudes sitting here.
Sure.
The fact that like when you, just like how we're responding with Christ is King. I know, but
Yeah.
I'm being generous on purpose because I think the parallel you're making is right. But what I'm saying is that in the same way that we are responding to Christ is King 1 week after this launches, right?
right.
I know for a fact that there are, African American people of color who resonated with that slogan in the same way when they heard that. They're like, yeah, who's arguing about that? But
Exactly.
then
That's the point I'm making.
as things play out, right? Yeah. So I'm just saying, I just wanted to
I was
be
talking about,
generous
yes,
to that.
I
But
agree
yeah. But go ahead.
100% with you, Josh. Well, let me be clear, more clear. What I'm talking about is the founders, the people that started that were trained
the social
Marxists.
organizers, the community organizers.
They were documented trying to be divisive with that, right?
Yeah.
Now, everybody jumps on that and Black Lives Matter. You can't, of course, Black Lives Matter, but that's not what it was being used for. It was kind of like a spit in the eye of,
well,
right?
that's exactly the
Weaponized
semantic
in that.
overload, because you're getting people to assent to a literal meaning of an inoffensive phrase, right? And then using that to build momentum behind the excessive
complex
meaning,
right? The complex
that has been added on top of it.
And those who have weaponized the term Black Lives Matter will say, Black Lives Matter in a situation that disparages other, other people, like, saying Black Lives Matter to spit in the eye of somebody else is saying, cops are racist, Black Lives Matter, right? And they'll do these things, which is not what I think a good portion of people who are saying Black Lives Matter actually mean. And so when you say, why you don't say that? That's completely racist when you put it in that context. And they'll come back and say, what, I'm not allowed to say Black Lives Matter. Do you think that Black lives don't matter? So in the same way, when you say Christ is King,
it's a trap.
You have those that have essentially blasphemed or used the Lord's name in vain, like the Nick Fuenteses or some of the the Muslims or the atheists that are basically saying Christ is King, you filthy Jew, Christ is King, with all of these things. It's like, look, you can't say that. And he's like, what's wrong with me saying Christ is King? It's like, well, I mean, I'm just,
I get what you're saying.
That trap, right?
But
the way you navigate that trap as Christians on Easter is that you shout it from the rooftops as it was intended to be. You claim the literal meaning of it, and if someone questions you, are you being anti-Semitic? It's like, no.
Or here's a novel idea, Tim. Here's a novel idea. You live it out in your life.
Yeah.
Like,
oh yeah.
You know how people know Christ is King?
I just mean specifically within the battleground of the phrase itself.
Yeah, for sure.
Right.
Yeah, claim it.
I don't think Christ is King needs to be caveated. Right? You don't need to say, well, I mean it just because this is how I mean Christ is King. Just say Christ is King. At the same time, don't go make a comment about the ethnic power of Jews in Israel or in America and all this stuff, and then end it with Christ is King. Just say Christ is King, right?
So then you're saying something else.
Lord of
Lords,
Lords,
obviously not intended to give glory to God.
Right.
Correct.
Yeah,
that's what
exactly.
we're talking about.
I think
in that sense, let's not
with
let
all
it be
three of you
hijacked.
here.
Wait, what?
Okay. This will be interesting.
I don't think
Get the battle axe.
it is wise or appropriate. This is why it pisses me off. I don't think it is wise or appropriate to post on social media Christ is King because of what is currently happening culturally. And I simply say that because we can say better things, or we don't have to post on social media at all. And that's why it's like, yes,
Sure.
I agree with you, Tim. Like, it is true, and we should have the right to say it. But can we not say he is risen? Or
This is such a good-
I just
You've been-
live
no,
in a
no.
world-
Go ahead, Josh.
Hold
No,
on,
no,
I'm not
this
done
is
yet.
really
I
good.
didn't-
You have
This
the
is-
hold on,
battle
I'm not
axe.
done
You have
yet.
the
Hold on,
talking
I'm not done
conch.
yet. Hold on, I'm
Oh,
not
go
done
ahead.
yet.
Go
I
ahead,
didn't
go
live
ahead,
in
go
a
ahead.
world. I didn't live in a world, and I have no memory of it, where that was the thing said. I grew up in the church. I don't remember that. Like, there's a twist here, and I'm
It's
sure
more common
we
in
can.
the liturgical denominations.
And that may be true. And so I think, yes, I want to hear what you have to say, Hughes. But from my perspective, I don't think it's appropriate to post right now. And I think that's part of the problem, as we clearly identified with the Black Lives Matter, the anti-vax, the rainbow, is that there is a reality that you cannot ignore, which is these bandwagons are around us, and we find ourselves in this post-Christian nation. And I do think wisdom would say it is not prudent and wise to be the one that sticks your head up and throws something on social media that says that. You can say something else.
Okay, I agree with you, but here's something to think about. That is the wise thing. The wise thing is to say, why here, why now, why in that context. To your point, there's a million other ways, and this is generally. And to be honest, I'm gonna be honest with you. This exact thought process is why it has taken me this long to do a podcast. This exact thought process. Why do I need to say anything? Why do I need to raise my voice into something that has to do with something else? Can I not do that locally? Is that not more effective? Can I not do that here, do that there? Here's the problem with that. This is what I've realized, and this is why I'm doing this, and here's why I'm even talking about it right now. And I feel that tension, Nick. I feel that tension because it is wise to tread lightly into this. I completely agree with that. But our world has changed. People do not spend time in public discourse, in community events. Neighbors do not hang out, in large social gatherings. The PTA doesn't throw soirees where mom and dad get to interact on a regular basis. People go to church where they hear a sermon, and that is the full extent of their biblical engagement. Christians do not make disciples. They have pawned that off to pastors like me and given me an hour, 30 minutes from the pulpit from which to peel through the onion that is our ridiculous world, ever grown, ever expanded by the internet. And then when it comes time to go to where the discourse is happening, it is cheap. It is dirty. It's frustrating because it's like, must I wade into this muck of nonsense? But if that's where they're at and all they're hearing is who owns that space, then who speaks against it? Who says anything? Who does anything? And so I'm not saying that the answer is for everyone to run onto your social media now and post Christ is King. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is be judicious. Don't say something without saying something, like we were talking about before. Don't go on a tirade about U.S. foreign policy and then type Christ is King in the papers. You're not. We all know what you're saying.
You're being disrespectful.
Okay? You're being
to
disrespectful. God. Correct. You are.
Right.
And now, but if your intent, if your heart, and I can't speak to this enough because again, the nuance and the tension is wading with fear and trembling into dangerous water, and knowing that the only person that you really need, the only person you need to be worried about is God. And that's enough. Mm-hmm. That's more than enough to be concerned about. And so if you are, before you go and you hit that send button and you type that thing, just think about that. But I also want to say that the grown-up in me, the generations that came before us that would admonish us to say, rise above it, as if this is some passing fade. I'm 37 years old. This nonsense has been going on for 20 years. It's not going anywhere.
So stop giving up ground.
Correct.
Right.
So
and
here we
if
are.
You give up this ground here, right, and you let the dominant discourse, public discord, immature and mimetic as it may be, if you let them decide what the true meaning of Christ is King is, and you don't dilute that with the genuine
some counter
sentiment,
narrative,
then you've given it up, right? You've given it up, and you've surrendered your right to say it in the future as it actually is.
Have you guys thought? So Jordan Peterson has acknowledged this, and a couple other ones, is that what you just said, Tim and Hughes, is that my impression is that long form podcasts is the solution to that, because you can go in and have a conversation like humans in a room, and it is cool actually, Hughes, because it is able to do both. We're not saying don't wade into the fray. We're saying don't wade into the fray and act like an imbecile.
Irresponsibly. Yeah.
Wade in. And I think this is an appropriate place. All the long forms. I mean, the Joe Rogan's doing the same exact thing. It's like all around the anti-vax, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, where it's like, hey, like this conversation is going to take an hour, not a sound words bite on a Twitter post. And I think that's the answer. That's
which
the
leads,
way.
I agree
to
with you, Nick. Which is why what we want everyone to do is repost the link to this podcast with Christ is King above it.
Like and
on Easter Sunday. Okay, that's the responsible way to do that. All right, long form podcast and Christ is King together. It's compromise. I'm not joking. Absolutely.
100% serious.
Can I just maybe pose a question and kind of
see what you did, Nick? You were too right. You're right, buddy. I agree with you.
Let me think through this because I'm trying to think of like if we could do it again with the rainbow, right? And as it was being repurposed for a homosexuality flag or a particular group, like how would we go about doing the things that were? Because I feel like what you said, Josh, the generations that have come, this will blow over until it didn't, right? Yeah. So in today's world, when we are seeing the beginnings of Christ is King being hijacked, like how would I respond? And let me just maybe go over a few things that I'm thinking without actually being able to like dig into them too much. So I might change my mind I want to give myself that freedom. But I think that it is important for us to confront those who are blaspheming and saying that in vain and using the Lord's name in vain. The Nick Fuenteses, the Candice, the thing is, Candice Owens, she doesn't directly say it. She knows that she's been in the headlines or in the view for flirting with anti-Semitism, liking people's comments that are anti-Semitic, for using Christ as King in a particular way in a particular situation, like right after Ben Shapiro goes and says that he disagrees with her or thinks that her commentary on the Israeli-Hamas war is horrible, and then her response is to quote a scripture and then end it with Christ as King. And there's the very public argument going back and forth, and she's using Christ as King. And she just posted recently saying, well, you can't tell me that it's anti-Semitic and all that stuff like that. So granted, it is granular. There are varying degrees. People are outwardly saying it like the Nick Fuenteses or these people that want a white nation of Christians, and these, white supremacists and other people that are utilizing it. We need to call those things out. We need to hold those people accountable and say it's disgusting, right? And it's not the, I would blame not the Muslims, not the atheists. I'm blaming the Christians, the ones that are claiming to be Christians, because you know better, right? And so the difficulty is, where do we drop the hammer so that we're not accidentally hitting too broad of a stroke, where people that are saying, I just want to say it. And I think ultimately it comes down to anytime that you do see it within your own circles, or even if you see it online. I'm not saying that we should all become social, or keyboard social warriors or keyboard warriors for Christ, but I think that we do need to call it out and recognize it and put it into the scope and say, look, if you are a Christian and you want to say Christ is King with the true meaning of it, like we had been discussing, feel free to say it. But also, I think that we should be calling out the, the false prophets, right? Or the false Christians, the false teachers, the wolves in sheep's clothing, and I don't think that as Christians we do that enough, right? I mean, this is coming from me, right? The probably the most charismatic of us all. Like, I think that we should be calling out, right? Calling out false teachings and false teachers, and we need to be dealing with, right? We need to be going into the temple and flipping the tables.
You don't think you should call out false teachers?
No, maybe I should clarify.
Yeah,
on
that's what
social media.
That's what I was saying. So,
where are they at,
social
Nick?
media?
Where are you going to do it?
See, I hate that argument because it's like, all right, they're here, so I got to wade in and be the commenter.
You don't have to.
That's
not for everybody.
I don't think
you post on social media. It's a moot point for me.
I'm not suggesting what you're talking about, Nick.
I'm sorry,
I think. I'm sorry. Hold on. I think I know what, Nick. I think we're talking about the same thing. I'm not suggesting doing what I think you're thinking, which is I'm not talking about being that keyboard Karen and getting dragged into, like, I think of Proverbs 26:5, right? Answer a fool, not according to their folly, right? So we don't wade in and play the same game. That's right. What I think you're saying. Like,
can't make the distinction who the fool is.
Right. You don't just go in and cheapen it in that way. Like, for instance, there's a difference between making a comment and identifying something as like, or saying something to the effect of, I don't agree with this. And then there's a difference between that and like goading somebody or picking a fight. There's a difference between getting in some prolonged drag out thing where there's no, like, you're not going to convince somebody, but there is a difference between being a blip that when somebody looks like, I do this, like when I'm on YouTube and I see stuff that I'm like, this is horrible, I hit the dislike button. I make a public
to your Christian duty of hitting a dislike button.
Yeah, I'm like, I don't like this, because I want people to see that, to be like, oh wow, okay, I'm not the only person who thinks that this is dumb. That's why the Acolyte trailer got so, like, blew up so quick, is because the sheer amount of dislikes that video got. You can't argue with that.
Yeah,
like, you don't need to have
different than a comment.
But that's what I'm getting at. Make a comment, but the character and nature of the comment, you gotta. That's on as the spirit leads, but like how you feel. But it's dangerous is the point.
We're
like,
gonna create a whole theology on.
I guess that's what I'm getting at, Nick. Is that like I understand your sentiment, because I feel that same way. I don't know how many times I have written long comments and deleted them immediately after writing them before I even post them.
To be fair, the nuance I'm applying is actually simply the internet. I don't think Christians should be in that medium slapping back and commenting. I take all of that and I internalize it to my community, to my neighborhood, so when Black Lives Matter was happening, or pick a social issue, I went totally silent on social media, and I went introspective to my family and my church. And those, I walked into rooms and had conversations, and I don't think we gain any ground. I actually would argue we lose ground as Christians when we enter the internet.
You've been effectively bullied out of saying Christ.
That's what happens. Basically, what you did, Nick. What's happened is that then when we say that, then this is what happens. The young 13-year-old who goes on the internet to see how the world is, because that's what they're taught. Okay.
Right.
Well, see, I guess I keep going back to the family and my family.
Dude, I'm with you.
100%.
Both and.
We're on the same page.
Like, that young 13-year-old is actually a good example, because I don't feel
they should be on the internet.
I'm supposed to be able to, like, is that my job to go help that young 13-year-old? No, I have 2 kids. That's my job.
Yes,
I agree.
100%. I want to make sure that we're not missing. It's a both and, Nick. I think 100%. Your first ministry is to your family. The first ministry is the ministry that God has you in, is the people around you. Right. That is your first ministry. He's not called everybody to be, social media warriors or evangelists. Right. And to some extent, everybody's an evangelist. Right. To some extent, but not everybody is a missionary.
Disciples.
Right.
Well, pick a different
everybody's
topic.
called to make, but we're called to, like, go into the world, right? And part of going into the world, preaching the gospel, making disciples, is turning the current culture on its head. And you go into the speaking corners in Athens, like Paul did. Right? He went into the world, right? So he went and he spoke and he debated. And if he were to say, well, my ministry is only to the Jews, I'm going to just stick to the synagogues, that's one thing. Right.
Well, and what about
I hope we're not
talking
talking past each other either.
Because,
No, yeah,
because
we're not.
I would liken
Okay.
it to Daniel going and defiantly, openly praying when it was legally
Yeah.
forbidden to do so. Now, somebody, a social commentator of the day, would have been like, well, Daniel's obviously making a political statement about the emperor, whatever Nebuchadnezzar called himself, right? And I don't think Christians really need to be waiting. Once it became controversial, so you could have just done it in private and nobody would have known. But it's like, no, you don't give up the ground. I am being bullied out of giving due honor to
Sure.
Christ at the moment when the imagery of his kingship is at its peak, and I'm not going to give up that ground.
Praying with your window open is different than posting on social media. And
No,
maybe
because of exactly what I said. If the society that Daniel was in had the opportunity to, and they did
They
frame
canceled
his
him with
actions,
lions.
right? They said, oh no, it's not about praying. He's not honoring God. He's being disrespectful to the king.
he's
He
being
didn't
defiant
mean
to
it
the
that
king,
way, right?
All right,
He
so I
didn't.
have a better question that I'd love, because I actually don't know the answer. I'm curious where you guys. So should Christians picket abortion facilities?
Do I think it's the best way to deal with that? No.
That's the conversation I'm having.
But it's not. But it's both
okay.
and. Here's what I'm
Yeah.
saying. Here's what I'm saying. Is it wrong for Christians to picket abortion clinics?
I didn't say wrong. I didn't say wrong.
No, not wrong.
I said
Sorry. Should they? Should. Okay. Here's
Should.
what I would say. This goes back to a previous conversation, and this is why I think this is a unique problem for Americans. To be honest, I would love to have Paul here right now, because this is one of the things, the Roman Christians, right? Because this is what it comes down to for me. I would not be having this conversation if I was not a stakeholder in the organization. Like, this country, the very existence of this country opened the doors of the gospel to parts to the world. It is a gift. It's a gift, right? And I have accountability for my part in that. So to your point, first my family. Yeah, Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the earth. And you have to think, just like even with me, part of the debate with this is I have to be careful that in pouring into and developing Christians, which is the focus of this podcast, that I do not create an unnecessary barrier to a non-believer who would come across this and then never talk to me again. However, so that's why I would say if I'm going to be controversial, the only thing that I'm going to be controversial about is the gospel. So what I'm saying is that the gospel is controversial. There's no way around it. If I put the gospel in front of you, you're going to stub your toe, Christian or not.
We all agree. Totally.
We all do, right? So what I'm getting at is that, like, I have come to the conclusion that if I am faced with something and I feel that I think, and that this is where people struggle, is that, like, if I sense a concerted effort, not even overwhelming, a concerted effort to subdue, characterize, or degrade the ability for the gospel to be moved with the means that the founders intended, and that with what God's given me, then I'm going to speak out against that wherever I see it. And this is what I think is important. It is the wisdom to have its integrity, but there's no like cut and dry, and that's kind of what I was getting at with, like,
Sure.
the
Discernment,
tension.
I
Like,
think, is
we can't say I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to post here. I'm not going to like here. I don't think it's a good idea for Christians to say. I'm not going to say don't picket abortion clinics, because you know why? Because abortion clinics need to be closed.
Hey, I'm with you. It's a practical topic, because that's how I see it.
Right.
I
love
see a
people.
comment on Facebook from a Christian, and I can be wrong. I'm not, like, fighting for
No, and
anything
I'm not
here.
beating
I'm
up
just
on you about it.
talking.
I feel the tension, dude. I feel that tension.
I personally, I'm not prescribing this. I personally, and I'm teaching my children and my family this, think that a comment on social media, on the internet, from a Christian trying to fix, adjust, or prove a thing is semi-equivalent to Christians picketing abortion clinics. And I hate abortion clinics and want them all closed. And absolutely, like, but I don't know that it gives us the best look.
Do you know how we lost the ground that we lost with like, I'll give you a perfect example with this. How did the United States even like, well, I gotta be careful here. The way that we lost ground in society with going from what is morally acceptable versus what is morally reprehensible. What I'm about to say, I'm speaking of as a Christian pastor, okay? That there is a moral standard of behavior, what is considered good and right according to the Bible, on which our laws and regulations and things were founded. And that is why certain behaviors and lifestyles were considered reprehensible and illegal, okay? The reason that changed is because every single time somebody touched the line, got near the line, looked at the line of somebody else's rights being trampled, they slapped the hand. They didn't take the high road. They didn't preserve the relationship. They slapped the hand. They filed a formal complaint. They didn't care about preserving the relationship. They filed a formal complaint. That happens enough times, and it literally prevents the system from working, and then people just make a simple value calculation. It is easier to abide than it is to oppose. And this is where Christians have lost the plot. And this is why I'm changing. I'm coming from where I feel like you might be sitting now, Nick, to where I'm so deep in that tension right now. I can't even say that. So I can say that 550 more times and it not be enough. But I'm coming to the conclusion that, like, we have to stop being so concerned with preserving the relationship that we are not stubbing the toe when it steps the line. You got to. Anyway,
Right.
I'm done.
I want to say too. I think that was.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say. I think, and that was. I think I would just reflect on everything that you said, Josh, because I think that helps me as well. I think also, to your point, Nick, it is interesting to note and respond to people that say, well, I shouldn't be ashamed to say it. No, you shouldn't. You're right. Or just people that are, I'm going to say Christ is King. My question, I think, would be, were you planning on posting Christ is King before all of this happened? Because if not, probably
Amazing question. Amen.
Great
right?
question.
Because
Amen.
right, if you're
What's at the
just
heart?
saying
Totally
it because
disagree.
of what's going on, right? But that's more of I think that's the first question I would ask, right? The second one would be to say that if you are feeling compelled or led to say that, go for it. But traditionally, I don't know, man. On Easter, and I would say he's risen, right? Like that was.
I'm saying you
that was what I would
specifically
say.
need to do it in order to put more volume of sincere, literal meaning and usage of it so that you can properly claim that specific verbal channel, right, of rendering glory at a very
Fealty.
The question
What's
I was
that?
asking Tim was more
Fealty,
of
proclaiming
right.
fealty. Christ
The
is
question-
King.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
The purpose for that question, though, Tim, for me is a heart check, right? Is to say, where is your heart at to say that? Because if you're going off of what you're saying, like we need to say it to make
Do
it
you
put
hate
out there and take
Jews,
it back.
Anderson?
100%. Well, listen, you're not hearing me.
Wait.
I'm saying.
Okay, back that.
No.
It's not
I
going
feel
to
like,
sound
hold on,
right.
you're not hearing me.
It's not going to sound
You're
right.
not hearing me. What I'm saying is I agree with what you're saying. Like if you feel the need to go out and say it and say Christ is King on social media and compelled to say it, go ahead and say it and don't put a caveat on it. Don't go and try to clarify it. Don't go and try to say, I think
I'm
the
not
real
like
meaning is
Ben
this.
Shapiro. Like,
Right, exactly. I'm 100%. The reason for that question that I had was to ask if you were planning on doing this anyway, or if this was just because of what's going on. Maybe double check and see if the intention behind it is to glorify God or just to take back the ground, which
yeah, I think
rather
it's the
both.
equivalent of,
Not just
may
to
the
take-
Lord's
just to
name be
take back.
praised. Okay?
Yeah.
Sure.
You're just
Yeah.
saying, no, this is our word. right? We get to say this. We don't have to sit idly by and allow it to be co-opted and have people pollute very basic, simple tenets of our faith, so that when people see them later on, they think, oh, because it'll happen incidentally. 2 years, 3 years from now, someone will say Christ is king without any of the anti-Semitic connotation. Someone will think, oh, that guy's anti-Semitic, and they'll think that because there wasn't enough pushback from people who believed it sincerely today.
I agree.
Yeah, I don't need somebody dragging me in front of an IG board because I posted Christ is King, and they'll be like, Chapman Hughes is anti-Semitic because he wrote Christ is King, and everybody knows what that means.
Right.
Like, I had this story. I'll tell you the story. This is a true story. This happened to me when I was younger. When I left Alabama, my parents were missionaries. Now, keep in mind, I'm 37 years old, so depending on who's listening to this might seem really strange to you, but this is a perfect example of what Tim is talking about because it wasn't that long ago. When I was in high school in 2003, okay? So sophomore, my friends had given me a Confederate flag in Alabama as a going away present, okay? So I had this Confederate flag. And a missionary kid from China who had just come and lived 1 year in America in Alabama, your friends, like, this was normal, pretty common then. And I went to a very diverse school. I go back to Taiwan, and I hang up my Confederate flag in my dorm room. And one day, probably like second semester, one of my dorm dad, he asks me, he's like, hey, so like, what's the deal with the Confederate flag? And I was like, what do you mean? I was like, it was a gift from my friends in high school. And he was like, yeah, because somebody came in the other day and was like, wow, I can't believe you guys let him keep that up. And they were like, what do you mean? And he said, I was confused because I didn't really know what they meant. And they were like, isn't that like a pro-slavery, like, racist symbol? I'm not going to get into this debate about this right now, but I'm just making the point that, like, I was a 16-year-old kid who received a gift from my friends in Alabama. I had that thing up for forever. Nobody thought anything of it or anything like that. Now, at that time period in history, that symbol did not have the connotations at the level it does today.
Right.
Today, there's no way I would fly that because there's no way I can get around it. It's lost, right? Now, and because that is clearly not what I want to communicate. And so therefore, I wouldn't put that out there. But that's where that, like, and there's a whole group of people who fought this battle about that, for years and years. And I'm not going to get into.
That's why I make the point, though, that this whole poison pilling of a simple phrase like Christ is King is anti-Christian. It is not meant to be. It is not happening in order to be protective of Jewish sensibilities. It is anti-Christian, not from Jews. It's anti-Christian from seculars and Muslims, right? That's why they're doing it. They're doing it to poison pill basic tenets of Christian faith. And I am saying, don't let them. So I don't post on social media. If I had any presence to speak of, right? I don't even have the login to these podcast accounts. Like, I don't know what happens here.
You're saying all this without any skin in the game, Tim?
Yeah. He's like, listen.
Well, because I don't. That's not my choice.
Okay, fair.
Yeah, maybe.
But
maybe. That's not a dogmatic, personal principle on my part. It's just a choice. It's a time suck, and but if I did, if it wasn't just me shouting into a void by making an account with no followers, I would. Just to say, no, this is ours. I mean it sincerely. There can be no credible insinuations of anti-Semitism or anything else. This is literally true.
100% agree with you. And as a Christian apologist, right? Like that the hair stands up on my head, or the back of my neck when this kind of misrepresentation of Christianity is used and how it's being hijacked and repurposed and everything. And so from me, I guess maybe the easy thing would be to say, let me post it and be genuine about it and everything. From a Christian apologist's aspect, and though I know not everybody needs to be at the level that I've, tirelessly put myself through to learn all the aspects of defending the faith, but like for me, the most effective thing would be to reach out to the Nick Fuenteses or the Candice Owens, publicly shame them. Like Paul talks about that when people have bad theology.
Nah, you don't have to associate with them.
Well, I mean, not associate with
All
them.
you have to do is elevate the truth. You don't have some special
No, you have to
responsibility.
call- not everybody, but I think there are certain people with that.
Yes, I would agree with
have,
that. If you
operate
have
in this
the-
realm.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And that's
If
what
you
I'm
have
saying.
the channel, if you
I
have
caveated
the,
that with saying I'm a Christian apologist. I'm not suggesting everybody do
Yeah,
this.
yeah.
But for me, as a Christian apologist,
Yeah, for sure.
I feel called to go out
Yeah.
and correct and call out those things, shame them publicly for blaspheming and using the Lord's name in vain. At the same time, I think the best thing that everybody could do, right, is if confronted or with it, say Christ is King unapologetically. At the same time, ask yourself that question: would you have said this anyway, or are you just saying it to say it without actually giving glory to God, but just to say it for the wrong
or ask
intentions?
before you type it.
Or you know what I mean? Like, there's so many, because you can see, like, even in my own logic, and I'm going through this, it gets grayer and grayer and grayer, and I don't think that we can take a black and white
literally
stance.
the opposite experience. My contrast filter is just all the way up. Just,
Can we
you
get the
have a
Shia
moral
LaBeouf say Christ is
obligation to
Lord?
say Christ is King.
Say
Do
Christ
it.
is Lord.
Do it now.
Pull it up.
Say Christ is Lord. Say it. You say Christ is Lord.
Josh,
Tim,
What?
I
wish I had that media on tap.
I hear what you're saying, Tim. I'm simply saying, I think, like, I am different in that I'm not going to go post Christ is King. But what I'm simply saying is, I personally think I am making a greater elevated decision by saying I will go post this episode. And that is not the same thing. It's not, in my
I agree.
personal
I agree.
opinion.
It's
And
not.
I think anyone listening right now can copy and paste this link and go, if you want to wage in on this, go drop this into everybody having this conversation, because I don't, and that's, I think, maybe the nuance I'm trying to personally describe, is that I don't think it is wise, personally, for me to go post Christ is King. I do think it is immensely wise for me to post this link all over my socials.
And you can post Christ is King on our comments. That's fine. We won't judge you.
Yeah, there you go. And we're
Get
taking
it out of your
it
system.
back. If you're posting it, we could get deeper into the theological aspects of Israel and Christianity and where the eschatological
We could
view of Israel.
browbeat
But I think,
Nick for his moral cowardice more.
oh, come on,
I'm kidding.
It's a joke.
my goodness. Okay, but
If
you know,
can't
honestly,
say
I
that
think
to
this
your
is
friends,
probably
who can you say it to?
this. I think this is a good place to curb that.
Can it? I agree.
Yeah.
Say Christ is Lord.
So
Christ,
say
say
Christ
it.
is Lord.
Say Christ is Lord. Say it. You say Christ is Lord.
No, it won't.
So-
It won't hurt.
All right, everybody. This has been another episode of the I'm Telling God About This podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation and you're still here, like, subscribe. I really do think it would be wise to share this rather than waging into the mess. If you have some extra time on your hands,
Get into the mess.
go drop it in the comments section for Candice Owens and Ben Shapiro. See what happens.
Yeah.
And we will see you guys next time.